that need for control was something that has guided me a lot in my career. If we screw up, no one dies. I mean, at the end of the day, we're in the business of creating pretty pictures. Yeah, of course I get stressed out, I get freaked out. I try to take a couple steps back and go like, hold it.
Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode number 94. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Aladino Debert, and he is a visual effects supervisor and director, currently at Zoic, but he has been at all the cool studios. He has worked on movies, commercials, and music videos, and so many different things. I'm going to bring him on right now and say hello, Aladino.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show. Yeah, to kick this off, tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole wonderful mess that we call computer graphics and visual effects in the first place.
Indeed. Well, first of all, nice to meet you, and nice talking to you.
Likewise.
So I originally studied architecture, which was somewhat of a common thing early on in the industry. I worked with many ex-architects over the years. So I'm originally from Argentina, and I had studied architecture there. And when I moved to New York, my intention was to continue with architecture. But through architecture and through my first gig working for an architect back in Argentina, one day he literally gave me a book this thick for AutoCAD, and he said, "I want you to learn this." He had just bought a PC with a copy of AutoCAD, and that was sort of my first foray into actual using computers for graphics. I mean, I had played with computers as a kid, but never sort of professionally. And so I had a little bit of that in my mind. So when I moved to New York, my idea was to continue, doing, studies in architecture, but I was also interested in sort of the early computer graphics experience, and I've always been a film buff. And so I ended up going to Pratt Institute in New York City. And at the time, they had a very early computer graphics program. It wasn't even a full degree yet. They were sort of building it as they went. And so first I started taking some additional sort of, extra AutoCAD classes, and we were doing things like, Curl Draw and how to draw. And I was trying to draw things in the computer using, pixels. And but really what changed everything is I had this one teacher, one of my AutoCAD classes, and I was trying to do all this 3D stuff. I didn't even know what I wanted to do, to be honest. In my brain, I was essentially continuing to study so I could go into architecture as I always planned as a kid. And he came to the class one day, and he was looking at the stuff that I was doing, and he's like, "You know what? All the stuff that you're trying to do, AutoCAD is not really good for. But we just started this new class on something called 3D Studio, and 3D Studio, the original,
not Max.
Forget Max, so pre-Max,
3D Studio,
and And so I signed up for that class. And I remember I'll never forget this. The first time we sat down, it was like 20 kids, and they showed us how to create a donut, a torus, a cube, and a cylinder, and put two keyframes so they would rotate. So they were rotating in space. We came back the next day because it took the whole night to render. You couldn't visualize it on the desktop. And the next day or 2 days later or whatever, when I came back, we have a render. And I remember looking at this render of mine, which was a torus, rotating, and a cube doing its thing. And I was looking at this stuff, and I was like, oh, no, definitely no textures. And I was like, oh, my God, this is it. This is what I want to do. So I, at the time, Pratt was sort of building this program, and they started adding more classes, and eventually you started doing sort of 3D animation and all that, and that's how I ended up studying computer graphics. So it was sort of not planned, but it was sort of serendipitous that teacher sort of guided me on that. And so my first gig, so what I did is, so when I finished school, I put together a reel of I created three or four sort of fake commercials, with super crude, 3D animation, all done in 3D Studio. And I started, sending reels around in New York. I mean, at the time, I wasn't really, I don't know if I was thinking, well, I want to do commercials or I want to do film. I just wanted to work in computer graphics. I had no idea how to apply it at the time. In fact, um, I had this dream of maybe working for NASA and doing, sort of simulations, stuff like that. I'm not that smart, so I don't think that would have worked out. But I started working, sort of looking around, and eventually I found this little studio. It was literally two people, and they said, "Look, we can't really hire you yet, but we like your reel. Why don't you start interning with us, and we'll let you sit on one of our computers and learn soft image." And from, soft image for us was like, ooh, soft image, right? Like it was all the sort of really big movies at the time had been done in soft image. So for me, it was, the opportunity to be able to go and sort of sit with this couple guys that they had a small studio and learn was just beautiful. So I started doing that, and one thing led to another, and after a couple of months they hired me, and I started working with that, and that was my first gig. And it was actually really great in hindsight, because it was so small that we had no choice but to do everything. So I learned, if I remember, I think that Jackie sent me a list a bit of it, of like mentors. If I think I've had probably two mentors in my life, one of which was knowingly a mentor, and it was one of the founders of this company, and his name was George Sakas. And this is a guy who had worked in Tron,
Cool.
doing yeah, and he had worked on the Last Starfighter,
Oh, wow. That's
doing
cool.
the original sort of graphics and command prompt stuff, using a software called Intelligent Light, I believe it was called. So
Have
kind of
you
like
have you been
early
to the
mid 80s.
set? Have you been to the set? It's up in the north of the valley up here in LA.
No,
Yeah,
I
you can go
haven't.
see it. It's a trip. It's a
Oh,
trip.
no
You'll
shit.
see. You'll recognize
Oh,
it.
oh, I
Bit of a
would I would
drive.
love that. But I
Yeah.
remember watching that movie as a kid. It's like, the spaceship. It
Man,
was
me too.
amazing. So
Yeah.
anyway, so this guy was, because it was only three of us. He taught me everything, and he did everything. He would, at the time we were all generalists, right? So he would model, he would texture, he would light, he would comp, animate, he would do the whole thing, and it was a really great sort of first gig for someone like me. Who, I was very, again, I had studied architecture. I was really into photography. I was, and of course I was a film buff, but I didn't know what to do with that, right? So, like I didn't study film per se. So it was, sort of finding my way slowly. But yeah, so that was my first experience in the industry, and we did a lot of little local commercials, and we had a good client, which was a movie theater chain called National Amusements in the East Coast. And at the time, they still put a lot of money on stuff that they would show before the movies, right? Like a little animated thing. So we did two or three really long pieces, like 2-3 minute, fully CG, with a little bit of live action. So that's how I started to learn how to, work with live action and composite and do green screen keying and all that stuff. So so yeah, that was my first. That's how I got in. And two years later or so, my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, um, she's an actor, and she wanted to. She kept talking to me like, "Oh, we have to move to LA," and I was like, "No, LA, I don't want to move to LA. LA sucks." And I was in sort of in the middle of my honeymoon with New York. I love New York, and especially as a young person, is fantastic.
Cool
But
town. Yeah.
eventually she convinced me, and we moved, and that's sort of how I moved into sort of long form first. I was hired by this studio called Metrolight Studios, which was sort of big in the sort of mid to late 80s and early 90s. They had won an Oscar for Total Recall with Schwarzenegger. So they were well known at the time, and they were maybe about 100 people or so at the time. And it was interesting. So they hired me, and it was the first time that I was surrounded by specialists. I wasn't really used to that. Like, okay, you do this or you do that, and it had, obviously has advantages and disadvantages. I suddenly worked with animators that were amazing that I had never. I was just animating by instinct. Like I didn't really have a really study much other than in school. But in school it wasn't that specific. But it sort of this generalist background sort of served me well because they didn't really know where to fit me because I could sort of do different things, and I was totally fine doing different things. I could rotoscope, I could track, I could rig. So I ended up sort of becoming a bit of a techie head early on, and I got really into rigging, sort of character rigging, and sort of the technical side of it sort of appealed to me. And even though I wasn't very good at scripting and doing stuff like that, I had two or three colleagues that were really good at it, and they taught me a lot, and they would sort of help me sort of break through things that I was having issues with. Today, of course, you would do it ChatGPT, but at the time,
Yeah, it's
we
human
were scripting
GPT.
everything. Yeah. So we at first we were doing soft image, but they sort of had, as a big studio at the time, they mixed it up a little bit. So they did have soft image, but they didn't use it very much. They were mostly an alias wavefront house with a little bit of prisms, which was the sort of
Yeah.
early, pre Houdini stuff. I'm talking about old software now. And so we were doing all the rigging and modeling and doing everything mostly in alias, and we were sort of mixing up prisms. There's two or three people that were sort of really good on prisms, and there were sort of legacy people from the studio, and they would create elements on their own, sort of like siloed little area. But it was cool. So that was my first foray into long form. Actually, that's not true. Before I moved to LA, we I was loaned out to this studio called Bolsmeyer and Everett, and it was a house that they did a lot of title sequences for films and in other sort of more sort of compositing based stuff. And so I worked on an Ang Lee movie back in New York. So I had a couple of sort of feature experiences on my reel, which probably helped me on getting a job at Metrolight.
Very cool. What was it like? So what would you say was good about starting that way, having the kind of luck or gift or whatever it was to go through the generous route, which was the same for me. I started out that way too, and I have my opinions on it. But what do you think is good about kind of starting out with the generalist approach?
Yeah. Well, I've thought about it a lot actually over the years. I mean, I think that there's two things, right? I mean, it also coincided with being young and
Yeah,
not knowing what wasn't
foolish,
possible,
hungry. Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
sort of being super excited about what I was doing and having no idea how to do a lot of this stuff and not knowing what the ways that you were quote unquote supposed to do things. And so I was experimenting. I mean, to this day, I think that the first 2 or 3 years of my career were what I think were the most creative in a sense of not creative like the normal sense of the word, but like how to work in computer graphics and visual effects because I had no idea. I mean, it's not like I had a visual effects degree. I studied computer graphics, which was a little bit of a kind of catch-all. We were, like I said, we were studying Corel Paint and 3D Studio and AutoCAD. It was sort of like throw everything into the bag. So it was kind of like do what you will with the knowledge. And I think being a generalist, I think in hindsight, it helped me later on as I became a lead or a soup because I come from everything. So it's easy for me to sort of put myself into the shoes of the people that I work with because obviously now people are way more sophisticated and way more experienced in certain specific areas of visual effects, but I still understand enough to know what it takes to do stuff, and I think that one of the things that you lose by not starting as a generalist is that sort of wider perspective. But of course, now that the industry has matured, it's not that easy to do that unless you're doing your own thing in Blender at home, right? Which I think is sort of coming back to that in a way. Like it, the industry is sort of going through its changes, and we can talk about it later. But the I think that in a way is I'm meeting people that they're doing everything themselves. So in a way, it's sort of going back to being a generalist because they want to do something, and now the tools are available for you to be able to do something on your own if you want to.
Yeah, yeah, and the tools have evolved a lot since we've been doing it. And it's been a lot of change,
Absolutely.
and small places still, in theory, tend towards generalism a little more because they don't have the capacity to
That's
have
true. That's true.
as many people.
That's true. Yeah.
So having that kind of the spirit of a generalist and starting at smaller shops and having that generalist experience, you served you well. It sounds like to um, when you got to late. What do you think it kind of gave you as a skill set that's the most important part of kind of progressing and becoming a lead or supervisor?
You mean having started as a generalist?
Yeah,
I mean, well, like I mentioned, I think again, it gives me a look. I think that what's most important for a supervisor, or a creative director, or whatever, visual effects supervisor, is to have the 30,000 foot view, right? I mean, the moment you sort of bog down into the minutiae, you start losing perspective, and your work suffers. All of this is my opinion, right? Like I'm sure there's people that think differently, but um, so to me, because I come from doing everything, I have it serves the purpose of I can talk to anyone on a team on a level basis, even if I don't understand exactly how they're doing something. Since I've done most of those things, even down to rotoscoping, um, I can talk in a way, and I can sort of communicate in a way that serves the team. Because I think the most important thing for a supervisor or a creative is to have two things, like maybe three. Like have a good idea, or to have a vision. I know it sounds cliche, but have a vision of what you want something to look like, whether a shot, a movie, whatever. Um, Having the ability to communicate that to your team in a way that it's clear, and it helps the team, and also to, and this goes back to my first initial experience in the industry, is understanding that you don't know everything, understanding that if you're lucky, you're surrounded by people who are really good at what they're doing, and to sort of shut up and let them teach you as well, right? So it's everything we do, as you know, and hopefully anybody who watches this knows as well, it's a team effort, right? Like, yes, what I just said notwithstanding, that you can do things alone, what the most fun I've ever had is when I work with a huge team, and we're all sort of working towards the same goal, and it's in a creative industry, it's a wonderful experience, so I think that having started small has helped me as I sort of progress in my career to again always being able to talk in a way that I understand, to talk to every level of the production in a way that I can understand, that they can understand me, what I want, and I can sort of relate and understand what they're offering to the process.
do you feel like it gave you a sense that if you're a generalist and sometimes doing projects on your own in that sense, where you're kind of thrown into it and you basically have to figure it out, you've got maybe no one to turn to tell you how things are supposed to be or how it's going to go. Do you think that um, instills you with a sense of kind of anything's possible, or that it will get figured out, and to be able to have kind of more confidence?
Yes, I mean it's interesting. There's two ways. First off, is like I said before, when you start, you simply don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know if it's the same now. If anything, because the industry is more mature and it has evolved. I'm talking when I started almost 30 years ago. The way we did things was different, and everything was newer, and it wasn't so much sort of collective knowledge of how to do things, unless you were working, I don't know, at ILM. You know what I mean? Which, but I wasn't, right? So um, it was a essentially you didn't know what you didn't know. And if you had the right temperament, and if you liked it enough, you just tried, and you were trying and throwing things at the keyboard and trying to figure out how to do stuff, and that was a wonderful experience. And second, what happened to me was maybe a handful of years later. I was working at a place called Vision Art, or here in LA, and we did this movie called Dr. Dolittle 2. And it was the first movie that I was supervising in the studio, sort of internally. We were working for, we were doing like, I don't know, like 150 shots of talking animals. And I had no idea how to do it. But what I've always been able to do is sort of convince people that I do. And it's sort of a knack, right? Like it's a mix of being confident and also being able to communicate well, and sort of having an idea, and also, very importantly, understanding when you're screwing up, and being able to not let your ego sort of get the best of you, and sort of sort of take a couple steps back and go like, yeah, no, let's go that way. But what happened was, like, anyway, it was a really tough job, project. Eventually we were working, I don't know, man, like 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, and but we finished, and the client was happy, and we everything. At the same time, by the way, my son was born during that project at the same time. So it was crazy. I was working an insane amount of hours. My wife was either pregnant or with a baby. But I remember what I got mostly out of that project was that if I could finish a project like that, I could finish anything. So it took the fear out of failure out of the equation for me, because in over time I sort of developed a little bit of a philosophy about that. Is a couple of things. First off, if we screw up, no one dies. I mean, at the end of the day, we're in the business of creating pretty pictures. Yeah, it could be a disaster. You can end up with no work. You could be fired, whatever. But at the end of the day, no one dies.
Usually,
we're
dies. It's true.
Usually, yeah. Right? Like, we're in the entertainment industry, so it's a that gives you a little bit of a perspective. At least it has with me, that even in the worst, yeah, of course I get stressed out, I get freaked out like anyone else, but I always remember that, because it serves me well, like, to, especially when I find myself in moments of like intense stress at work because of whatever. I try to take a couple of steps back and go like, hold it. You know what I mean? What's the worst that can happen? That we don't deliver. I mean, sure, it would be a disaster, whole list of disasters, right? But it's important to sort of to be able to take that step back, and realize that, if we're lucky, we're getting paid to do something that we love. Maybe not every day, but if you're lucky, at least some days. I mean, I swear to God, I mean, to this day, when I get really excited about something that I'm doing, I still don't want to go to bed. I want to keep working. And I find myself thinking how fortunate I am that I found that, because I think that originally I went into architecture because I was attracted to sort of the mix between sort of art and science, right? Like, it's another sort of career that uses a very similar part of your brain. Where it's like you're working with space and volumes and light and color, and maybe not movement, but it's movement of you as a person through a building or whatever, right? So, I think that I was very fortunate to find visual effects, because I think I'm a better visual effects artist than I would have been an architect, perhaps. And in architecture is a really tough, really tough career. Because it takes decades for you to achieve really amazing projects, right? So yeah, anyway, I don't know what the question started about, being a generalist, but it's it's a little bit of philosophy that I've accumulated over the years.
Was there a moment where you had to like reckon with your younger self to say, I'm not going to be an architect?
Yes. No one ever asked me that. Thank you. It was so the first year at Pratt, my intention was still to go back to architecture. Because so Argentina has a high like a schooling system that is similar to Germany, in that we have polytechnics, like technical schools, um, which are a year longer. So I ended up doing an extra year of high school than all my friends. Um, and you can sort of specialize on something, like it's either electrical engineer or computer science or mechanics, or um, or architecture ish. And it's really super rigorous. And at the end, for instance, the last year, this extra year of high school, the last year, you team up with two or three other people and you design the house with everything. You have to do everything from the structural engineer to the plumbing to the water. To you actually go to the city to fake get permits. You do the whole thing.
Wow. Yeah.
So to me, I was like, of course I want to be an architect. I mean, I've been studying like this since I was 13, and
On the
that was
path.
always my
Yeah.
intention. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what happened was, on that first year, or as I started to get better, particularly as I started to do animation in school, I realized that for me, it's like, this is what I've been looking for, and I didn't even know what it was called in a way. So it was a little bit of sort of nostalgia for what I didn't do, because I've always loved architecture and I still get architectural books, and because I think it's a we live inside what we build, right? So it's a very important thing that we almost never pay attention to unless it's something super fancy like the Disney Hall or something, right? But even our house, anything that you spend your days on was designed by someone, right? So um, it's a wonderful art. But for me, I think that as I started getting better and I started seeing the possibilities, I mean, this is time when amazing movies were coming out, like from Jurassic Park to T2 to like a few years earlier was The Abyss, which to me was
Amazing.
the
Yeah.
holy grail of filmmaking. And I was starting to go like, holy cow, I can actually maybe work on this stuff. Like it hadn't even occurred to me. So it was, I think that took the sort of the pang out of sort of having to leave architecture aside. Um, but interesting you asked that. I don't think very often about that. It's a good question.
I I originally trained as a software engineer and became a software engineer and then had to switch. So I just wondered, because for me I had the same thing where I had to leave the thing which I had put so much momentum into and switch across this other thing. I really was compelled to, because I saw Jurassic Park and that was like, all right, and The Abyss, same dude,
I
make
mean,
those
right? Like,
things
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Steve Williams, no, the incredible stuff. It made me kind of know, but I sort of kidded myself into thinking I should go do that, and then really went in the direction of my dreams. But I was just curious, because I know for me it was a bit weird making that switch and having to kind of almost cheat on my first career and like dabble into the next one and sort of make my peace with leaving it. And at that point I was quite happy to leave it, to be honest. But I think it's an or I also asked it partly because I know the world is going through a lot of change right now, and everybody that I encounter pretty much is going through some sort of change.
Having
Our
to change.
industry, yeah,
Yeah,
and it is. I've seen it more recently in the last 5 years than I have in my entire professional life.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
how do you you've gone through a few changes in your career too. You've progressed to becoming a supervisor and a director as well.
Yeah.
Um, has that come about kind of through your desire? Have you been kind of like pushed into moments where you're like, okay, you're directing this now, and what have those changes been like?
Well, first off, by the way, you mentioned Steve Spaz because I work with him.
Oh, cool, really?
Yeah, yeah. So he was directing a lot in the early 2000s, and I got to soup stuff that he directed. Wonderful
Wow,
guy. And it's funny because
amazing.
I knew of him because of Jurassic Park and the
Yeah,
lore, and the mythology, the test that he did and showed in ILM, and then I got to work with him, and it was awesome. But
that's cool. Can you get him
back
on
to
the
your
podcast?
question, yeah. back to your question, no, I've never. No, it was never given to me. Um, so it's a bit of a mix, right? Like I think that I've always it's a bit, I'm a little bit of a control freak. I admit it, and I think that it has to do with wanting to own as much of the process as possible. I'm sure if we had 2 hours of therapy, I could explain it better, but probably has to do with my upbringing. And I moved a lot when I was a kid, and it was like five different schools by the time I was eight. So I think that that need for control was something that has guided me a lot in my career. And I've always felt that I could, a bit of hubris, a bit of naivete, a bit of total ignorance, that I could do better. Like I could grab this and make it better, right? And I think that like I said before, I think one of the knacks is being able to convince people that that's indeed true. I mean, obviously, I must have I must have done something right that people actually allowed me to do it, but it was always wanting to be able to direct, and we'll talk about directing for real, direct the process from high up as possible, because I always felt that what I wanted is to be in control of the final product, whatever the final product was, if it was a shot, a sequence, whatever, right? So I've always sort of tried to, sort of show that I could do it, and then convince my superiors, my bosses, and my soups and my leads that I could take on more. I think it has to do a lot of the fact that I'm an ANSI artist, in the sense that um, I get bored easily, right? So the only way for me not to get bored is to sort of find ways to get challenged all the time, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why I was always try to sort of advance, sort of career wise, or stepping ladder wise, because any step that I took higher up, it brought challenges, right? So, and I think that that's what I was looking for. And when it came to directing, many years ago, someone told me, I don't know if he was quoting something or whatever, but he said, if you want to, because this is maybe like 20 years ago or so, and I was doing, we were doing some commercials, some stuff was good, some stuff was like, and I remember sort of looking at some of the stuff that we were doing. I'm like, I could do that. And again, it's a little bit of hubris, right? Like, but it's, directing, unless you're doing it for yourself, you have to convince a lot more than your superior, immediate superiors, right? You need to convince the client, you need to convince an agency, whatever, right? So, and it's very catch 22, right? The chicken or the egg. Like, well, show me what you've done. Well, I haven't done anything. Well, then you're not going to do it, right? So, a couple of things happen. One of them is that one client, which I had been doing campaigns for sorry, the camera moves, for 2 3 years. There were this for a company in the East Coast called Bright House, just like it's like a cable provider, but they do more than just cable providing, and they did a lot of commercials with us, and I built a really good rapport with them, and they were wonderful people from Florida, and so we would go out for drinks when they came to the city, they came to LA to finish things up, and one time I sort of built the guts and was like, hey, if you the next time you have a project, would you let me pitch it for you to direct? And they were like, sure, why not? We'll let you do it. Pitch it, not let me do it, right? So, some time passed. We did some other projects, and eventually, maybe a year later, we're like, you know what? We have a series of spots that I think you may be good at. Why don't you pitch it to us? And I had already been doing sort of decks for sort of visual effects decks, for they were never like a directing deck, which is different, but I had a little bit of experience sort of putting ideas together visually and sort of stealing images from the web and writing a little bit and so on. And and to my unending surprise, they said, okay, you can direct it. And it blew my mind, because it was 4 different spots, or 5 different spots with live action and visual effects. It was like a dream come true for me. And it, so that was my first big sort of break in as a director, and it was all thanks to these these people that sort of trusted me. Again, we had been working together for a while, and then what happened was, so I did this, and to me, I call it the curse of the artistic mind. It's like, okay, this is great, but I want to do better stuff. It's like, well,
Always. Yeah.
welcome to the club, right? It's like
Yep.
you and everybody else. But coming back to what I had started saying, it's like a friend told me, if you want to direct, which sounds stupid at first hearing. It's like, well, what does that mean? And in the way I took it to heart was like, look, I'm always being a car guy. Like I'm a car freak, and I wanted to direct a car spot. And of course, no one would give me a car spot because my experience was a different type of work. And so I designed a spot as a spec spot, and I pitched it to the company that I was working for at the time. And it took some doing, but eventually they agreed to let me do it and let me sort of use the resources of the studio and artists when they were free and so on and so forth. And that spot changed my career,
What
literally.
happened?
So what happened was it was a spec spot for Audi, the car brand. So very designing, very lots about illumination and sort of details of metal, and it was sort of very conceptual piece with beautiful music. And I got a lot of talented people to help me, and ended up looking beautiful, and I was super proud of it. And that in time sort of led to me moving back to, well, I had been a digital domain before. I had a somewhat short stint, maybe a year and a half or two, um, in the late 90s and early 2000s at DD, and I was working on the feature film side. I left eventually. I worked at a place called Radium for many years, and mostly commercials and stuff like that. But at the time, DD was forming a sort of a production company sidekick called Mothership, and they were looking for directors. And because they knew me, and that spot sort of was a motionographer and AICP, and it sort of got good press and good exposure. They got in, we got in touch again, and eventually ended up going back to DD, and I went to DD again as a once again a sort of multiple hat wearer, because technically I was hired by Mothership as a director, but from the get-go, the first time I started talking to him, I said, look, I don't just direct. I mean, sure, I would love to just direct, but I don't think I have the chops. And I was totally honest about it. It's like, I don't know if I can do it just that. I don't know if you'll be able to sell me just as a director. I don't know if I have enough, to be able to sell me as that. But I want to soup your shows because you guys do amazing freaking work, So going back to DD, which was in 2010, it was a dream come true, because DD, I mean, it's DD, sort of storied house. I had already worked, with them 10 years earlier, and I knew there was a lot of people that were still there, and so it was a sort of jump ahead and jump up in the level of work. And what was amazing, particularly as a supervisor and a director, was that until then I felt that I had to be involved in everything all the time, not because I didn't have talented people around me, but because we didn't have enough. We were small. And then I suddenly went to DD, which was like 1,000 people. And the amount of talent that was accessible as a supervisor was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing. I had never worked with people that were so good at any one thing, because like you say, until then, I sort of had worked, well, Radium was smaller, so a lot of us were sort of generalists. In the studios before, they were smaller. I mean, Metro was bigger perhaps, but that was a lot earlier. So by now, the level of the artistry was incredible. So what happened as a soup and a director was that it allowed me to take 7 steps back and go like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I don't have to micromanage this stuff. So I can move back and look at even wider picture and become way more ambitious on what I wanted the stuff to look like. Because I felt that until then, I'm sort of generalizing here, but to some degree, I was um, contained by my abilities as an artist. Of course, I was working with very talented people, but because there weren't so many around me, it was, I always felt that I was always still sort of jumping in and doing the work myself. When I went to DD, it was like, whoa, I don't, I can just ask for whatever I want and it's going to happen. This is sort of
Yeah.
mind blowing, right?
Incredible place. I mean, you've got the best in the world there, and you have to bring your A game. And but there was also a lot of people, as you said, around you teaching you things and doing incredible work. It's
And
amazing.
also, what I always loved about DD was that there was very little in the way of egos getting in the way. The whole sort of ethos of the company, pirate flag, and the whole thing. It really it felt like that. It was like the camaraderie and in the collaboration was always amazing. And even though it was sort of interloper in a way because I was sort of coming in high, which is it wasn't really the way things were done at DD. I think I was normally people sort of climb the ladder there, but I think I was able to jump in because I had already worked there. They sort of knew me in a way, and hopefully I was able to convince them and convince the people that I was working with that I was one of them, and I hopefully help elevate my own work thanks to them. It was fascinating at the time.
Yeah.
Ended up being staying there for another 14 years.
Oh wow, since 2010.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was there in 2012. So it must have been there at the same
I'm
moment
sure
as
we crossed.
when
Yeah.
Jungle Book split off
Oh,
and went
all
to a
right, right
different
on.
building.
Yeah.
But yeah, amazing, very dark and incredible.
Yeah, totally.
Scott Ross was our last guest, actually. Scott,
no way.
Daniel Lay. Yeah.
All right.
We had some great chats about the industry and all of
God
its,
can talk about the industry for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and all of its changes that he's seen kind of many times over, having come from the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
What are you seeing at the moment in terms of the industry and where it's morphing and changing? And there's a lot of hype and myth and BS out there around what's going on.
Yeah,
So what's your
obviously,
take?
I think that there's many things that are happening all at once, and like in our industry is being affected disproportionately, perhaps because it's not that big, really, if you think about it, right? Like, um, obviously, I think first, it's a roller coaster of COVID and post COVID. I think I think what happened was like the appetite for content was so immense during the pandemic that everybody was so busy suddenly that there was a bit of a lack of vision from big studios of the idea of, hey, this will end. It won't stay at this level when this little problem we're having gets resolved. And I think that obviously after 2-3 years it started to sort of first plateau and then it started to go down. And on top of the fact that studios like Marvel, I think that overdid it in the amount of content they were generating. And I think that sort of threw the viewership off, and a lot of studios, for instance, like DD, that were so dependent on Marvel, so the volume of work go down because big studios were sort of cutting down. Then of course the strikes, which I supported on concept, but the thing about the strikes is that when they started, we were like, holy cow, this will affect us when it ends. Like if this goes long, we're done because if we don't shoot, we don't work, right? And then I remember when the strikes ended, everybody's like, yeah, and then we were like, yeah, but we don't have anything coming. So I think that was the second sort of hit in the industry. And of course, how not to talk about it, but AI. I mean, I think AI, well, yes, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of BS, but there's a lot of truth as well in the sense of, how it's changing everything. I mean, we are of an age that we saw multiple revolutions, right? Like in technological revolutions. I mean, we saw that, personal computer take over homes, as we saw the internet start. I mean, as a granted, it started in the 70s, sure, but really as a
Mature.
world changing technology, we saw it, right? It's not that old. But AI, what AI is doing at a speed that is astonishing. And I think that the world, let alone our industry, is not ready to adapt to what this can be and what this can do. And to be specific in our industry, look, Nuke had sort of AI tools for 10 years. So it's not like we're total ignorant to AI technology. I mean, at DD, we were doing what is called deep fakes and deep fake technology for many years, many years. I mean, it started with Benjamin Button. I mean, 2008, right? So, but what's happening with the tool, with AI as tools, is that a couple of things. First off, I think that they're changing so fast that it's hard to keep up. And I try to stay up, on top of everything as much as I can, but it's like, it's sort of overwhelming. There's a couple of people at Zoic that are much better at sort of studying and developing tools and really sort of getting into the nitty gritty. For me, particularly Julian, Brami.
Yeah.
But for
He's
me, it's
his
more
own
like
technology. Yeah.
Well, right. For me, it's more like great tool, right? Like I want to use it as a tool. No, so look, there's many things that how AI is changing the way I work. I mean, for instance, in look, and this is something that is important for me to mention. I'm not blind to the human cost in the industry, let alone the world at large, of AI. I understand that there's people that are going to be out of work because of it. It's at the same time, every technological revolution has done that. The problem is the speed of this one, right? Like the speed in which this is changing the way we do everything is something that we haven't seen, right? Like we simply haven't seen before. So that aside. So again, I understand what this does to our industry and our colleagues, and I get it. But of course, it has. Then I put my other hat, and I'm like, well, as a user or as a soup or as a director, well, certain things are wonderful. For instance, I tend to do a lot of style frames, right? Either for a deck as a director or sometimes to sell an idea to a client that I'm souping a show, whatever. To the team, hey, this is roughly what I want to do. And my, MO forever was like, grab things from online and bring it into Photoshop, paint, put them all together, boom, send it. Or if I had something super specific, and this is where the human cost comes, I would hire a concept designer. Well, I'm not hiring those so much anymore because for me, I can translate what is in my head to an image much faster and much more directly than I could before. So I'm torn, right, as an artist and as a soup, because I'm very aware of the ethical, let alone the legal issues, the ethical aspect of AI and large language models. I get it. The problem is at the same time, I see it as how I can do my work better. And it's a tricky thing. It's sort of addictive in that regard, right? Because it's like, well, suddenly you can do certain things faster. Well, do you go back to not doing them faster? Do you always do it this way? Or do you always, that's why I say I don't do it so much. I mean, I'm still working with amazing designers because including, for instance, I just finished a campaign for HP and I work with this really good friend of mine, Gregory De Maria. I don't know if he's here. If it is, hello. And he's a fantastic designer. And for me, it was like, I want to work with him. I want to tell him what we want. Go. designed for us. And then it's like, well, whatever tools you use is your problem. Like I want to use your brain, right? And that's the difference. And that I think is what the saving grace. Look, AI. We could talk about AI for 2 hours, right? I mean, there's societal sort of ramifications that are sort of scary to contemplate. Fake video and all that, this misinformation and whatever. But for our industry, solely in our industry, the ability to it's still a tool. Now, can you do full video, full shots using any of the several video models that are out there? Yes, but, and the but is important, it's still very difficult to art direct. You still don't have a client, right? And so there requires a big re-education of how we do work if we are to use tools like that to do final stuff.
Yeah.
Because your clients,
yeah.
Well, right, because your clients still want their stuff the way they want their stuff. And you can't just go like, oh, no, but we're doing it with, whatever, Sora or VO3, so you can't really change this unless you want to change everything else. Well, no, that doesn't work, right? For now. So that's the thing. It's, so there's several things that are happening at the same time. Everybody's developing, including us at Zoic, models that they're curated, right? So for instance, let's say you work with a studio that they have a bunch of IPs and a gazillion, movies or images or whatever. And everybody's trying to do this is sort of curate your model in specific content. So then what you generate is essentially part of their IP. So that takes sort of care of the legal side. Ethically, it's a curious in between. The problem is, the studios, and I'm talking about sort of the entertainment industry as a whole, they go for they can get their product the cheapest way. I mean, that historically has been the case, right? They don't go out saying, I want to spend 100 million and I don't care if you can do it for 50. Well, no, right? So I think that that's the biggest sort of factor driving AI in our industry right now. It's just that there's always going to be clients that don't care and they just want something done as cheaply as possible. And now that's becoming easier to do. So I think that what AI is doing as soon as is raising the level of the bottom. I mean, what used to be just horrible to look at is getting a lot better. As far as us, we go at the higher end of visual effects, sort of, is that we are trying to figure out, because everybody is trying to figure out how to use it in our pipeline while still keeping us designers and us artists involved. Because at the end of the day, AI has something that is very insipid. This is personal opinion. There's a bit of a sameness to it. When I see an amazing image, but I suddenly find out that it's done with Midjourney, I'm instantly going like, okay, so you're a good prompt writer. I think that art is intrinsically human. It's an intrinsically human endeavor. And I think that if you take the human out of it, it ceases to be art to some degree. And I'm hoping that, people continue, eventually come back to that realization. You still need the great artists to think about this stuff and to be able to direct this stuff and to write this stuff. And you still need the amazing artists that produce the work, because at the end of the day, if we are doing art for other humans. And if the machines take over and they feed us content, well, that's fine if all you're looking for is content. But if you're looking for something that has art behind it, I think humans are still very much part of the equation. Now, it's been 5 years, so maybe everything. It's been 5 months, so maybe this is changing. But this is my, so far, sort of my opinion with this crazy revolution that we're witnessing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting to hear your opinions on it and thoughts. It seems like it's here now, so it seems like we have to kind of make our peace with it one way or the other.
Right, and that's another, that's one thing that I talk a lot about with people that are interested in, is like you cannot uninvent technology, right? Like, this is out,
Typically,
whether we like it or not. It's just like, nuclear weapons, right?
I
Like
think
it's
I
based
was
on
just going to say
physics,
that.
it's
Yeah,
right. So
yeah.
yeah,
But we
you
we
could get rid
invented
of
nuclear, but that with
no,
that particular case, we kind of invented it, and nobody kept using it. But there's a lot
well,
of them
sure,
around,
but
and
the physics and the technology behind it
yeah,
are
yeah,
based on physics, right? Like you
yeah.
can't that let me rephrase it. You cannot erase knowledge very easily. So with AI, well, you could get rid of all the data centers, sure, and then you can run it. Fair enough. There's a there's something to be said about that. They use too much electricity and too much water or whatever. But the knowledge is out there. So I think that us in the industry, it behooves us to figure out how to use it in a way that is ethically responsible, legal, and it doesn't take the humanity out of what we do, because otherwise, what's the point of it all? You know, I think that that's not that I know how to do it, by the way, Edward, but this is sort of philosophical sort of talk about it, but I think that's an important thing. Um,
Definitely. I mean, people are trying to figure that out too. We had Ed Ulbrich, who was our
my
guest before
boss
Scott, right?
was my
So
boss for many
he's
years. I mean,
talking
Ed,
about Benjamin Button and the him now being at Moon Valley, where the mission is to create clean models and create a path forwards for this.
yeah, I mean, I remember I saw him a few months ago, and we were talking about right when he was joining Moon Valley. I mean, Ed is a legend, man. Yeah, yeah, I've known him for many years. In fact, he hired me back at DD. So thank you, Ed, if you're
Cool.
watching. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, I
So
mean, and there's definitely, as we spoke about, precedent for Scott and him both mentioned the reactions to previous inventions and previous transitions and previous technologies being pretty rough, and seeing lots of people being angry about the change. And but yeah, typically things don't go back in the box. And
no, and again, I think what's important is to be cognizant about the human cost. Like it's in particular to artists that put their lives into this, and some people that had very long careers and now suddenly are beginning to be out of work, and or the young people that are coming out of school, or they're trying to get into the industry, and they're looking at this and you're like, well, what are they going to need me for? And what I think, like I said before, I think that you know um, algorithms can replace a lot of what we do, but not everything. And I think that there's an instinct, and there's a the more emotional side of art, and the emotional side of what we do is something that, for now, again, I'm not a futurist, and I'm not Ed running company that is doing this specifically. He knows much more than I do, but what I see it from my side as a director in a soup is it's a great tool, and it will be silly to pretend that it doesn't exist. So we have to learn how to use it because everybody's using it, and it's sort of an arms race, right? Like, it's like who's using it more, who can lower cost, yada yada, using it. But to me, it's more like it's allowing me to do certain things that I couldn't do, but I'm still very aware of the things that I still can't do with it, and I don't even know if I would want to, because one of the things that is important is kind of going back to the beginning of the ability of doing everything yourself. Sure, you can, but would you want to? Like, one of the the most pleasure that I've gotten in my career is working with other people,
same.
and collaborating and finishing something, and having this this emotion that is, it's almost like you run a marathon together, and everybody collaborates, and at the end you go for a beer, and it's awesome. And I've made lifelong friends in the industry because we were in the trenches together. Are you going to go have a beer with your algorithm? I mean, I don't, what I mean? Like,
Doesn't sound like
where
fun.
do you go, right? Like, not yet anyway. I mean, there's crazy robots going on now, but it's, I don't know. I'm not blind to it. I mean, I think that it obviously is changing everything. Um, Forget everything else. I mean, we're just talking about our industry, right? But forget the rest of humanity. Um, but I think that there's still a place for art, and still a place for the sensitivity that we artists bring to any artistic process, that it's both valid on its own, but also because it gives us artists pleasure, right? Like, it's when you're able to achieve something that is harder or that is hard to do, I get more pleasure out of it at the end than something that is easy, right? And a lot of what we do, or at least a lot of what I get out of this crazy industry that I've been on for so many years, is the work. Not, it's funny. I always joke about it that when I finish a project, I'm like instantly like, I want to do the next, because what I want is the doing, not the, and the collaborate and everything that comes into the doing, right? Like, I'm not just looking for the end product, because in fact, I'm hypercritical of my own work. So usually I don't like the projects that I work on at the end. So I kind of like, I don't want to look at it. I'd rather, I'm excited for the next one, and the next one, I want to work with people, I don't want to work with all the tools, the best tools. It's fine. I'm sure that Ed and Scott talked about when CGI was coming into the picture,
Yes,
figuratively
we
and
did.
literally. It's all fake. It's all computers. Well, not really. Here we are, 30 years later, and or 35 years later, and we're very much part of the process, because we're still part of the equation. And I think AI has the ability to revolutionize it in ways that we are not aware yet. But I hope that there's a place for the human eye and the emotion that we bring into the process. I hope so.
I do
Here's to
too. Yeah,
hoping. Here's to
yeah, I'm with
hoping.
you.
Yeah.
And I think there's also that assumption that going on out there that AI is uh, easy and cheap. And my experiences of it so far is that it's actually quite hard and it's expensive.
It's expensive in ways that most people don't even know, too, right? I mean, again, data centers, the amount of electricity that they use, the amount of water that they use, whether they're good for the environment. Again, there's sort of bigger questions here. There's certain things that are easier if you look at very specific, simple stuff. But again, try to do 300 shots in a movie all with AI. I mean, it's not possible yet. I'm not saying that it won't be possible in the future, but if I always joke that no matter how fast the computers get, it always takes the same amount of time to render a shot. And the reason why that is because our expectations change with technology, and our bar goes higher with technology. And just like I told you before, like when I went the second time to DD, and I was like, suddenly it's like, holy crap, like I can think differently because of all these amazing people that work here. Well, with tools, it's the same, right? Like in my experience anyway, if I see something, okay, the computer can do this faster, well, I'm not going to get stuck doing the same thing I was doing before. No, and then I'm going to think about, well, what else can I do? Do you know what I mean? And I think that AI in the entertainment industry and in filmmaking, it has I'm hoping that people think of it in that way, that they don't go like, oh well, then I'm just gonna go run for a couple hours and let the algorithm do its thing, and hopefully when I come back it gives me something that I like. Well, again, what's the fun on that? Like we didn't get into this industry for the money or the fame, hopefully. And
Fortunately,
you know
not.
we
Yeah.
we got into it because we love it, because we like doing it, right? At least I do. And most of the people that I work with, are in it because they love doing the art craft. And if we all become great prompt writers, well, obviously there's something that gets lost. So I'm hoping that again it becomes part of a tool set that filmmakers can utilize to do something that is in their minds and may not be able to do otherwise, right?
my
Which
theory my theory on it too is that prompting, as powerful as that is, in the same way as prompting to a team of artists is powerful. You can tell them what you want them to do. They can get that right or wrong. Usually you do more than that, and words aren't enough if you just only use words. With the team of the best artists in the world, it's not enough. You need more inputs. You need visual inputs, and that's where we can so far see it progressing is into a place where it can take more input. And but we'll see where it
We'll
goes.
see. We'll see. Look, I mean, it's look to me. If you can facilitate certain things, um, and that allows you to look at the work in a different way, and it allows you to aim higher with what you're trying to do. I think that's a net positive. Understanding that there's a human cost, that there's people that are not they're not going to be able to do certain things because there's tools that are going to be able to do it faster, cheaper. The problem is, the same happened with industrial revolution, with the steam engine, with electricity, with computers. It's just at the speed, right? Like the speed,
The
it
rate,
makes it
yeah.
difficult for the industry to adapt, and that's where the human cost comes in. I'm hoping that people. I think that the secret, dude, is not to be afraid of it. It's here whether we like it or not, right? So I think that the best thing that you can do as someone who's in the industry is try to get educated. You're not going to get as good as everyone else. Like again, like I'm famously again. There's people that are way better at it than I am. I just use it for what I try to look at it like, well, if you can do that, well, I could use that on this project, or I can think of a way to use it on such and such. You know what I mean? Like it's important to get educated in what we can do, because you may need it on your next job. um, Maybe you change careers and it's something that is useful for your next career, but also because it's something that it allows you to hopefully do your job better. I mean, I that's my hope, right? I think that our industry has always been a ladder, right? Like you start at the bottom, you start certain things, and then if you progress and you get better, you start doing better things, and yada yada. Um, that's been sort of the way the industry has worked, unless you were in filmmaking specifically. And I think that this, would allow artists to get better at what they do. You know what I mean? And again, it sounds simplistic, and hopefully I'm not coming out as sort of sort of not paying attention to the reality, but that's my hope. My hope is that people see it for what they are, which are amazing tools, and they find a way to put in their toolbox. That's my hope.
I'm with you. Yeah, and I think you've been very careful to say that there is a definite bag of things to be cautious and careful about. That's very clear. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing this time and your thoughts and opinions on this wildly changing landscape of the entire world, and particularly visual effects. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up? Any places they can find you or work that you have out there?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm a stickler to on my website. I put everything I can put of my work. I take great pleasure in creating breakdowns and edits of what it takes to do the work that we do. So it's my name.com. So I have a lot of cool sort of behind the scenes videos and breakdowns of the work that I do, for episodic TV, for commercials. There's also, if you want to see what it takes to go, like to write a director's treatment or a director's deck, I have them there too. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you want. I'm always around. If you have, I'm always looking for making connections with people that aren't, in the arts in some way. I'm a big photography fan, and so yeah. If the biggest thing that I wanna leave everyone, unless anyone has a question, but it's, I think art is more important now than ever. The more you bring automation and algorithms and computers that quote unquote think for themselves when they're doing, which they're obviously not, the more I think personally the arts become more and more important. Because again, art is a uniquely human endeavor, and we connect with other people with the arts, with music. I was reading today about I can't remember, Spotify, whoever made a deal with an AI music creator, and they signed a contract, to And I'm like, really, dude? I play guitar. My son is a musician too. Like, why would you do that? Right. So I think that it's important that to remember that we started working in this industry because we are an appreciator of what the industry gives, which is entertainment. And entertainment and the arts are important now, as they've always been, if not more. And I think that the more you see AI take over certain things, the more human made art becomes essential. Because when you take the person out of it, that's right, if you ask me anyway, you take the person out of it, to me, it instantly becomes boring. Because what I appreciate is the reason why people paid $70 million for a Klimt, right? Like, do you think they're going to pay $70 million for a Mid-Journey image in 100 years? No, right? We still value, that human touch. So I hope that, especially anyone who's starting in the industry, or they feel that it's so overwhelming and AI is taking over and so on, just try to remember that, because I don't think arts are going away. They're mutating. In our job as artists is to find ways to adapt to a changing world. We've always done that. We've done that with visual effects. I mean, you ask someone who wasn't a visual effects artist in the 70s versus someone in the 90s versus someone now, and they're like completely different planets. And that's just simply because we adapted to the changes in technology. And this is just another. Granted, is faster and more scary at first glance than all the other ones, but it's still something that I think that we can find ways to work with. And I hope that people don't get disparaged and disillusioned and leave the industry, because we need you. We need you.
I agree. I'm with you, and I'm also seeing more people hiring on LinkedIn than I have all
That's
year.
true. There's an uptick. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's hold on to that and encourage the next generation in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And same with, the studio work for Zoic. I mean, we do great work, and,
yes,
you can always go to their website and check their stuff. And we keep trying to update it and put new stuff. But yeah, reach out. Happy to help. And yeah, I'm on the VS Glove board of directors, and we have a mentorship program. So if you join the VES, you can sign up for mentorship, programs through the VES, which is great. So that's another resource for people in the industry, especially younger people that are starting. I encourage you to do that.
Amazing. Yeah, mentorship is very important. It's been a very important part of my life too, as has Zoic. That was one of the first jobs in America.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I was at Zoic for a bit. Yeah, did lots of TV, particularly, and pitches, and yeah, it was a great studio.
Yeah, wonderful people. Yeah, and it's I've known them for a long time, but this is the first time I actually work with them, and it's been lovely. I mean, I've been there for almost 2 years already, but it's great team. Yeah, super cool.
Amazing. Well, say hi to them from me and Jackie.
I will, of course. And
thank you again so much.
Thank you for the great questions, and I know if we went over or not, but thank you for being a good host and keeping it going.
You bet. No, I love doing this too. This is the process is what this is about for me as well. And it's been a lovely conversation. Great to get to know you. Thanks for taking time out of your evening.
Of course. Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks also to the people who turned up tonight or are watching on the replay. And speaking about mentorship and keeping up with what's happening, CG Pro has a webinar coming up on the 16th. So that's going to be all about AI, what we've just been talking about for the last little bit. Here we train people and all the cutting edge technology as it relates to CG. So come and check that out. It's free. At the very least, you'll come and learn something. Sign up for the webinar and our newsletter, and you'll hear about things like that we do, and things like this in our CG Pro show. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks with our next podcast, and another week with the CG Pro show. Take care. Go out, keep up, and learn things and create art that you care about. Thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.